It's not fair. Now, how many of you have said that sentence some point in your life? If not as an adult, then at the very least as a child, because be honest with yourself, we've all said it as a kid. And a lot of the time, yes, it's just coming down to whining about something, and usually you've done something wrong, and something's been taken away from you, or you've lost a privilege. But that's part of growing up, and that's not what I'm about to talk about here. However, how many of you have also then heard, usually as a response, well, that's just how life is, or that's the way the world works? And how many of you have also thought that that was completely stupid an answer to give? Because ultimately, what makes life challenging or difficult or unfair isn't the world or life itself, it's the people in the world. I'm not saying, when you have an issue, go and blame it on someone else, because that's not right. And a lot of the time, issues and difficulties that people face come down to themselves. Sometimes aspects of themselves that are beyond their control, for instance, like anxieties that find really difficult to overcome, or sometimes decisions that they make that ultimately they know are wrong or incorrect or going to cause harm to themselves or others. Now, when that happens, that is down to you. But for the most part, some of the difficulties and issues people face when they say it's not fair isn't down to them. For instance, lots of people today, lots of families today are struggling financially or with not home security, but with job security. Now, the parameters for that depend on you again. Were you doing your job well? Great. But here's the thing. Say now you're doing a really, really good job and it's a really important job, like you're a teacher or you're a doctor and you're not getting paid enough. You're getting paid a really small amount considering the kind of work you're doing. Or even, in fact, if you're someone who cleans up the streets. Now that is very important for hygiene reasons. It keeps everyone safe from chemical infections, bacteria, and all sorts that would be floating around the air otherwise if we didn't clean our streets. Now, if you ask me, that's a very important job, as well as jobs that involve caring for people who can't care for themselves, like the disabled or the elderly. Now, lots of those jobs don't earn a person a lot of money, and it's very unfair, and there are people who are struggling with that now. So if someone turned around and said, well, that's just how life is, or that's just the way the world works, that's incorrect. Because the way the world works is, while there are things like natural disasters which are beyond our control and are very devastating to a person or a community, again, beyond our control, that has nothing to do with what we're referring to when we say it's not fair. Or if someone says that's just the way life is. Life isn't the thing throwing that unfairness your way. That comes down to the company you work for a lot of the time, or how the government runs finances. Now, if everyone in the world were to cooperate, were to be on the same page or on the same consensus and understand what fairness genuinely is, or where it's appropriate, and by the which I mean when someone deserves something, they should have it, especially if they've worked towards it. If everyone agreed that there was no need for people to be higher than anybody else, there was no need for certain people who ultimately walk over others to earn mass amounts of money, for example, while people who are doing serious jobs like the ones I mentioned are earning low amounts of money, and everyone could agree that that seemed a bit disproportionate to the situation, a bit unfair, then if you ask me, I think the world would be a lot fairer place. And that phrase, it's not fair, wouldn't come up so often. Because, again, and it's even things like the educational system, which are usually based on older concepts and aren't modified correctly for how we understand education today. I mean, for example, in my school, we had this thing in art about quantity over quality. It wasn't about the quality of your work, it's about how much you produced. And if you're an artist, you understand that's a bit backwards, because it should be about the quality of the piece you're producing. Well, because of that, there were lots of students who weren't being graded as high as they should have been, simply because they didn't have the amount of work, because they put a lot of detail, a lot of effort into the pieces of work that they were doing, and then still getting downgraded, even if the aesthetic or the coloration or the shading or in general the overall appearance of the work was better than most other students, they still wouldn't get graded appropriately because they didn't have the correct amount. And that was something even the teachers regretted doing. But you see, that goes a long way then into like future aspects, into like if they want to go to college or university and do art. Because that's going to be on their record, and the people who see it are going to think, maybe they don't work so hard, maybe their talent isn't quite up to snuff, right? And that's just one example. But that's what I'm saying, okay? When people say it's not fair, and people then respond with, that's the world or that's life, that seems very incorrect to me, because ultimately the things that make life difficult are coming down to how society in general tends to operate around people. Now, I'm not suggesting that there should be a huge revolution or anything about that, but what I'm saying is I think people really need to take a look at the things that make life unfair and see where they originate from. Because then perhaps that will go a long way to trying to reform a few things and make life a little fairer for everyone in general. And I'm not just saying about people who are like really struggling, people who are poor, people who are homeless, but even for people who are technically at the height of society, even there'd be unfairness. And with a sort of overhaul of how we see things, then perhaps their lives would be more fair. It's a big debate in my head, and it's really hard to put into words, honestly. But I just thought it was an interesting point that I had in my head that I should put up here, just for a discussion, you know? So, if you have any thoughts on what I've said, please put that in the comments. You know, follow me because I run a autism and ADHD awareness vlog, but also I'm thinking about adding more videos kind of like this. And some of more of a geeky nature, just, you know, when I want to talk about things that I just in general like. And then some serious subjects like this. Follow me, like I said, anything you think you want to say, put in the comments. I don't care what it is, honestly. Because whether you agree with me, whether you disagree with me, because that's the point of a debate, that's the point of a conversation or a discussion. And if it was all one-sided, I don't know, something feels a bit off about that to me. So there we are. Now, as I said, if you've liked the content, you want to see more, then follow me. And besides that, keep the conversation going, you know, and tell me what you think. That's all I got to say.